Good morning. I'm going to share with you a personal story about how I actually started this. My parents actually immigrated from Greece, and what we did is we started from Macedonia, and they went to New Hampshire. And what happened is that we lived in the mills, or at least worked in the mills for a period of time. And I was always listening to my parents tell stories about Greece, and I always wanted to go back and see what it was like. My father and mother were goat herders. So when I was 19, I left America and I went back to Greece, and I spent a year herding 2,000 goats on the Macedonian and Albanian borders down to Mount Olympus. And then I spent another year photographing ancient funeral exhumation ceremonies in my mother's village at the base of Mount Olympus. But these dramatic ceremonies where they take these bones out and they wash them in wine and water. And I wanted to see, when I came back to America as an artist, I wanted to find something equally dramatic. And I really couldn't find anything that powerful except in hospitals, in the teaching files, or in X-ray, or in surgical rooms. My brother, who happens to be the chairman of the Department of Ophthalmology here at Brown University, invited me into the surgical suite, and I saw him doing these extraordinary surgeries, you know, and it was almost like a Dali painting, you know, as he was cutting across the eye, or the lasers were going across the eye. And I thought, wow, this is drama. So I started photographing it so I could actually collect it for my artwork, but Life magazine saw it and thought, this is an interesting story, and they published it. All of a sudden I was now doing stories for Life magazine, collecting work for my artwork, and I started to become more and more fascinated by the science of how that laser actually went across as it refracted and started changing the size of the beam and the direction of the beam. So I wanted to actually see if I could, like that light, actually design a camera that could go where that light was going. So I started to teach myself mathematics, and then advanced math, and then physics, and then advanced physics, and I started designing my own cameras and lenses. I designed the first endoscope that could photograph the development of the fetus from outside the amniotic sac, and that became a cover of Life magazine. And then I went on to design one of the first confocal laser scanning microscopes that could actually photograph eggs in the in vitro fertilization program without destroying them, which again became another cover for Life magazine. About 19 years ago, I started to see how CT scans and MR scans were really actually big cameras looking inside the body, and I thought, wow, this is spectacular. I mean, I can actually see into the body, not just be stuck to the surface of the body. So I thought, if I could actually, I understood the physics of how light went through physical space. All I had to do was learn Unix and then C and C++, and then I could actually figure out how it could go through virtual space. And so I learned the languages and started writing algorithms and code to actually be able to compile these and actually look at them in 3 dimensions about 19 years ago. And over the years, as we've been able to see more and more into the body, I was offered a position by Rick Satava, who is here at Yale, who offered me the position to write algorithms and gave me money to write algorithms for NASA to do virtual surgery in preparation for the astronauts going into deep space flight. As you can see, it's the typical Macedonian goat herder career path to a multidimensional algorithmic programmer. But what I wanted to do was to, unfortunately it's an academic crowd, but I hated academia, so I bolted from Yale, went back to New York City, and created a company because I looked at how this information that we sort of were finally looking into the body, really beginning to understand it, from the molecular all the way up to the gross anatomical data. You were starting to really understand how it was working. So I thought, if I could actually merge my art background, my journalistic storytelling background, and this technological background to use this to actually tell stories, then we could actually transfer from what is a text-based system to really a rich visual experience. And what we have done with all of this information is to now create a new website, which you are the first to see. It's the first time I'm showing it. It's launching as a beta version on Monday. And the concept is to basically to enter a therapeutic area. Every week we're going to launch a new therapeutic area. And in that, you're going to be immersed in that environment, because what happens is that when you take a look at the typical websites right now, whether it's WebMD or any of the major sites, fundamentally they're kind of a hodgepodge. It's a 19-year-old CD-ROM hyperlink technology. Nobody likes reading on an RGB screen. And so what happens is that you go there and you link from place to place. And when you talk about basically taking control of your life, you need inspiration, and you're not going to comply unless you're inspired, unless you are empowered to understand and are given a real understanding about process steps back to health. And so what we're doing is that every week, as I mentioned, I'll give you a typical example. We start off with a story, something like hypertension. Starts off with a video. Could we have sound, please?
High blood pressure, or what we call hypertension, is a condition where every time the heart pumps, it pumps out blood at a much more forceful pressure than it otherwise would.
Hypertension affects 1/3 of the adult population and is a major risk factor for many other diseases. It's known as a silent killer because it often occurs without any major symptoms or warning signs until a more serious problem arises.
Of all the things that age us, high blood pressure is the most important. Now that's stunning to most people, because who would think a little bit of extra blood pressure in your arteries would make a difference? Here's why it makes a difference. Your arteries are only designed to withstand a certain pressure.
And every time that heart beats, that wave of energy accelerates out of the heart, and it just batters the blood vessels. And really what it comes down to is that battering is what tears them up. It tears up the lining of the vessels.
The damage to blood vessels as a result of hypertension can lead to a vast array of health crises, including atherosclerosis, or hardening of the arteries, which causes a decreased blood flow to the heart and the rest of the body. The damaged blood vessels, the increased blood pressure, and the decreased blood flow force your heart to pump harder to move your blood. The heart can become strained and enlarged, or patients can suffer angina, a heart attack, or heart failure. Hypertension can cause eye damage, including blindness, because the small vessels in the eyes can rupture or burst from the increased blood pressure. It's also the leading cause of chronic kidney disease and stroke.
After I was diagnosed with high blood pressure, the doctors were really concerned. You know, they told me, I remember an Army doctor looking me right in the eye and saying, "You could have a stroke today."
History of hypertension, high blood pressure?
Yes.
Are you on
Getting your blood pressure checked regularly and keeping an eye on the levels are the first steps to avoiding more severe consequences. An optimal blood pressure reading is 120/80 or below. The first number measures the pressure in your arteries when your heart beats, called systolic pressure. The second number measures the pressure in your arteries between beats, or diastolic pressure. Doctors agree there is no good kind of high blood pressure, and even a few millimeters of mercury above normal greatly increases your risk for a more serious condition, like a stroke.
Hey, it's up there, Mr. Eugene. We just really want to get those numbers down. And it's a matter of just really making sure that they're dieting, exercising, and taking their medications, whether that's 1, 2, or 3 medicines.
These days, doctors often use a combination of medications tailored to the patient, and the medications have come a long way.
10, 15 years ago, you took a blood pressure pill, you were tired, you were fatigued, you got depressed, you couldn't function. That's not necessarily true today. Blood pressure pills today can treat blood pressure very well with minimal side effects.
Whether it's with the help of modern medicine, or through a healthy, low-salt diet and exercise, or a combination of all these approaches, treating and preventing high blood pressure is crucial.
If you have high blood pressure, make sure your blood pressure is treated. They call it the silent killer for a reason.
I learned that I've got to take care of this. And the best thing about it is that it's easy to take care of it. Now that I have my high blood pressure controlled, there's no downsides. I can live my life completely without limits.
Now, once you do the video is sort of the 101, trying to understand it. We then give people the ability to do a deep dig. Again, entirely, you have your hyperlinked text data here, but this now begins to explain every aspect of hypertension. And it allows you to keep on moving through important data sets that are all real data. So, for example, here's a baroreceptor, one of the parts of the system that actually control the sympathetic nervous system. And these are in the carotid arteries. They're actually throughout the body. But sometimes you get tachycardia, you just actually rub on one of these and you can actually control the event. But what we're doing here is through just visuals, clicking through, you can experience in great detail this disease state. Each one of these conditions, we are giving you videos, interactive conditions, all of this. For example, I want to understand the consequences of what this does to my heart if I have hypertension. Click for detail, and you can see actually the normal heart on the left-hand side. This big is your left ventricle, and of course what happens is it's starting to push out so much more, throws the balance of the heart off entirely. You see the dangers in relationship to stroke. Again, rich visual experience, clearly understand, here's Here's the normal, here's the ischemic here. Basically, it's blocking the vessel. What happens, it atrophies and dies. Here's a hemorrhagic stroke where it bleeds out into the brain. The kidneys, it's a killer of the kidneys. And so fundamentally, this is, if you were to read all this information as opposed to just see these comparisons very, very quickly, every one of our diseases we are covering in this level of detail. Every week we are launching a new therapeutic area. We're starting off with 11 weeks of cardiovascular diseases, where every one will have a video, will have a disease state, and where after you actually do the kind of like the 201 version, if you wanted to do the deep dig, we then, instead of having to go back to Google, we've already selected the best hypertension link spots. So you're immersed in that environment. The problem is when you go to these other places, if you have hypertension, you don't care about arteriosclerosis, you don't care about asthma, you don't care about all these other issues. You want to know how to treat it. You want a physician to actually have visuals to show you exactly what's going on in your body, to show you little details that really teach you exactly how the body works and empower you with a fundamental understanding of how your body works. So the thing is that we're going to basically change it from in a very simple way, going from text to images, a rich visual experience. Now, the health guides will cover, as I mentioned, we'll cover every week a new therapeutic area. So you can imagine in 2 years we'll have about 100 sites, every one covered in this level of detail. You will not at that point go back and read very boring text. This will be the way that everyone will explain disease. Now, for example, everyone has heard a story about obesity, but it's always very difficult to understand the consequences and the comorbidities. Let me give you an example of how our technology is helping to really clarify the dangers of these diseases.
In the last 25 years, obesity in America has doubled. 1/3 of America is obese. That's about 60 million people.
About 15% of our children are obese. And the number is steadily growing.
The CDC just declared obesity as dangerous as smoking.
We are obsessive.
We are obsessed.
And we're paying the price.
Obese patients do not live very long.
Each year, obesity causes at least 300,000 deaths in the U.S. alone.
Americans spend well over $100 billion every year on obesity-related health care.
There are a lot of people who are having heart attacks, despite all the efforts we've made to educate people about the ravages of obesity.
We know we eat too much junk.
And we just eat too much.
And we don't exercise like we should.
But what is actually going on inside our bodies that makes us fat?
With real human data,
cutting-edge medical information,
and state-of-the-art technology,
we now have a whole new insight to obesity and the toll it takes on our body.
From our expanding waistline, right down to the cellular level.
Shortly after eating, the circulatory system is already delivering vital nutrients and energy to the cells of your body.
These nutrients are so small, you would have to be the size of a red blood cell in order to see them.
When our cells have more energy than they need, our body stores those nutrients. Immature fat cells begin absorbing this biological energy and transform into mature fat cells.
The longer our body is supplied with excess nutrients, the larger these cells become. As more and more are transformed, what was once just a tiny cell is now a massive tissue, altering not just our physical appearance, but our physiological health.
We all know being obese can cause heart disease.
But that's just part of the story.
I seem to always get the slot just before we're about to eat. But since we're already there, what we're doing is building interactive tools so that, one of the problems with obesity is most people think about it from a vanity perspective, but really what happens is it encompasses your vessels, it chokes everything, the damage from a chemical point of view, from a physiological perspective. So we're building tools that people can actually interact and go inside and actually see the incredible damage that these things, these diseases, these comorbidities from diseases are doing. And you have a visceral feel and understanding of it. But we wanted to then go beyond that and actually create galleries where people could actually interact with the data, where they could actually take it and say, oh, I want to actually save that piece and I want to draw on it. So I'll come back up and here's an angioplasty, here's a balloon stent, and I can actually create my own program so that people can actually use this as a teaching tool. Kids can use it in school, all these kinds of different devices for basically allowing them to see whatever it is that they want to control. And most of this information is going to have like a little library where someone can actually keep it down here for a single session. All this information will now, rather than saying our libraries are so valuable only to us, we're opening them up. Anyone can actually just walk into the media gallery and use the content from that therapeutic area to create a lesson of the day. So if a doctor just wants to drag something in, or a media person wants to actually tell a story very quickly and just drag one image in, then basically they can control it, draw on it. We will have extensive communities where people will be able to actually use the information, but then there's a part here that physicians will be able to actually use and save the information. So they'll actually have their own libraries that they'll be able to annotate, keep this information alive for anyone who wants to actually use it. They'll be able to annotate it with the right hemisphere, the limbic system. They can actually zoom in on the information, and they'll have their own library, which is going to have an increased number of tools, which we're going to share with everyone in the world by basically being able to use our libraries. The whole experience is going to be a rich visual experience. We even actually repurpose our other assets. So when we even do print pieces, so something like this for Newsweek on chronic kidney disease, we then turn it into an asset for the web. So here's, and again, the importance of story. Here's a wonderful man in Indiana who's dying of chronic kidney disease. He wants to live to see his grandchildren grow up. He's in deep trouble. So he's got a 12,000-acre farm in Indiana, and he's going to have a transplant. And unusually, they found that his son-in-law was a perfect match. Now here again is a stage 5 kidney, which he has, and here he is producing a tremendous amount of erythropoietin, which the kidney produces for red blood cells. And he's going to have that one transplanted into his body. So through story, you can actually use the biology to explain to people high-end science. Because of drinking, smoking, obesity, what has happened is that he's killed the glomeruli here. Now, the glomeruli are very fine filtering systems that are inside every nephron. And what happens is if they're in trouble because they're degrading because of diabetes or hypertension, then in essence, they start to basically lose their filtration system, and then you basically can't produce red blood cells, the whole host of things. Now, what we did is we created a new mouse called a Windstar München mouse, and changed the wavelength on a 2-photon microscope so that basically the cortex of this mouse is so thin that the glomeruli are close up to the top of the cortex. So we could actually scan this in 5 dimensions. And this was one of the most important pieces of information at the American Nephrology meeting. But I use this as an example because everyone always says, oh, is this for a physician or is this for a consumer? And we say, this kind of visualization is very high-end science, but because it's so clear, you can use it both ways. And as my brother often tells me, most physicians haven't learned anything new since the day they left medical school. So, this is going to be a great refresher course. These technologies did not exist when they were in medical school. So fundamentally, we're building the biology into intimate stories about these people and giving you a clear understanding as to the pathways of what you must do next. They're harvesting the they're harvesting the kidney here through an endoscope, and then what they do is they plant it. It's actually unusual. You end up with 3 kidneys. They plant it at the bottom through a false pelvis, actually with a false pelvis here, rich blood supply here, close to the bladder, and then these will atrophy over time, but they're still working. And the last image in the story is just, here he is walking down his cornfields after the operation, he with 3, he with 1 kidney. So fundamentally, what we're trying to do in this series, and what we will do, is give you that epiphany. all we really want to do, I mean, a lot of times we talk about, these kinds of diseases. Most people, 92% of diabetics do not understand what they have. It is a chronic disease. Now, it's not because they're stupid, it's because no one's ever really explained it compellingly. And when we do these kinds of stories and people walk away saying, holy shit, I get it. It's that kind of epiphany. Actually, we call this series the Holy Shit, I Finally Get It series. But that's all we're trying to do. We're trying to give you an understanding of what you can do, the demon of the disease, what you can do in prevention, early intervention, and then the consequences of intervention. You will clearly understand it after you see it this way. You will not go back to looking at another way of understanding this because it will be clear. And I look forward next year to share our next generation of advancements with you. But for our first generation, we're quite pleased with this one. Thank you.